At 3:22 in the morning, the glass doors of Rosario's diner exploded inward with a sound like breaking ice. Valentina Harper stumbled through them, her 29-year-old body moving like a puppet with its strings cut. Blood ran down her left temple, a dark ribbon across her pale cheekbone. Her cheap blue work shirt hung torn at the shoulder, and her hand shook with a violence she could not control. The August air hung humid and thick, tasting of coffee grounds and grease that had been cooking since the previous evening. The late-night crowd froze. A waitress with a coffee pot paused mid-pour. 2 truckers at the counter stopped chewing. The black and white checkered floor, the hum of dying neon lights above the counter, the stale smell of decades pressed into every surface, and 3 dangerous men in suits that cost more than everything Valentina owned went absolutely still. In the corner booth, Lorenzo Romano sat slumped forward. His face was ash gray. His lips had turned blue. Beside him sat Vinny and Dario, men with shoulders like vault doors and eyes that had seen things that would break ordinary people. They had been talking about shipments and territories and money. Now they did not move. Valentina walked straight past them. Her eyes did not waver. She did not ask permission. She did not hesitate. She simply collapsed beside Lorenzo's unresponsive body, her trembling hands finding his chest, and she began to push. Compression. Release. Compression. Release. 1, she whispered, though no one had asked her to count. 2. 3. Dario's hand moved toward his jacket, toward the gun that lived there like a second heartbeat. His fingers brushed fabric. But something in the woman's face stopped him. Not her beauty. Not her strength. Something else. Something like purpose. What the hell is she doing? Vinny's voice came out thin, questioning, disbelieving. Valentina's palms pressed down. The compressions came faster now, harder, fueled by something primal and unthinking. Her hair swung across her face. Blood from the gash on her temple dripped onto Lorenzo's white shirt. 15 compressions. 16. 17. Come on, she said to a man she had never seen before. Come on, come on, come on. The diner had become a held breath. Even the neon light above the register seemed to dim, as if the universe itself was waiting. 20 compressions. Vinny and Dario moved toward her simultaneously, their bodies tense with purpose. Hands reached out. Voices rose to pull her away from their boss. But Lorenzo's right hand, the one with the silver ring on the index finger, lifted slowly from the booth cushion. One gesture. That was all. His men stopped. A sound escaped from Lorenzo's mouth, not words, but air, raw and gasping. His eyes snapped open. Storm gray. Burning with the shock of return. His first sight in the darkness of collapse was a stranger's face, inches from his own, covered in her own blood. A woman he had never seen before. A woman who had not fled. A woman who had stayed. Valentina pulled back, her chest heaving. Her hands dropped to the cracked vinyl booth seat. She collapsed backward onto the checkered floor, gasping like she had surfaced from drowning. Her entire body trembled. The cut on her temple throbbed with her heartbeat. Lorenzo coughed. Once. Twice. His color began to return, flooding back into his face like sunrise. He looked at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. Then he looked at her. What is your name? His voice came out rough, like gravel poured into whiskey. Like a man speaking for the first time in years. She could not answer. Her lungs would not cooperate. Her throat had closed like a fist. Outside, through the rain-streaked windows of Rosario's diner, someone watched. Preston Mercer stood across the street beneath a green awning that dripped with August humidity. He was 34 years old and carried the arrogance of someone who had never been told no. His suit was black. His watch was gold. His eyes were calculating in the way eyes become when ambition and cruelty learn to dance together. He had come to Rosario's to photograph Lorenzo's weakness, to gather ammunition for the board meeting he had planned for next month, the one where he intended to convince the council that his uncle was no longer fit to lead the empire. Instead, he had watched a woman covered in blood save his uncle's life. Preston smiled. A blade of a smile. A knife-sharp thought was already forming behind his eyes. This stranger. This nobody who had just made herself matter. This woman was a problem. Or perhaps an opportunity. Perhaps they were the same thing. Rain fell harder against the window glass. Preston did not move. He stood there watching, his fingers wrapped around a phone, already thinking 3 moves ahead like a man playing chess with people's lives. Inside the diner, Valentina still could not speak. Her name felt like a foreign word. Now let us go back. 7 hours earlier, when everything was still falling apart. When Valentina Harper was not a hero. When she was simply invisible. The emergency room of County Hospital at 8:19 in the morning felt like the end of the world. Valentina sat in a plastic chair with a clipboard in her lap, and the words written on the paper were not words but daggers. Heart valve replacement surgery. Pediatric cardiomyopathy. 12 days. $22,000. She looked at her son Oliver, age 7, sitting beside her in a Spider-Man t-shirt that had belonged to 2 children before him. His small chest rose and fell with each breath, mechanical, labored, like an engine that kept trying to catch. His skin had a bluish tint around his lips, a color that meant his oxygen was not enough. His dark hair fell across his forehead, and he was playing with a toy car, the wheels long since broken, but he spun them anyway, round and round, pretending they still moved. "Mommy, when can we go home?" His voice was small. Smaller than a 7-year-old's voice should be. "Soon, baby. Soon." The lie tasted like ash. The doctor had explained everything clearly. Oliver's heart was failing. Not slowly. Not in theory. Now. Today. The valve was deteriorating. Without surgery in the next 2 weeks, his heart would stop. His organs would fail. Her son would die. Valentina reached into her pocket and pulled out her wallet. The leather was cracked, held together by muscle memory and prayer. She opened it with hands that knew exactly what she would find. $43. That was the sum of her survival. That was the distance between Oliver living and Oliver dying. Not even $2,000. Not even $500. $43 and 12 days. She had worked double shifts for 8 months straight. Early morning cleaning hotel rooms, her hands wrapped in latex gloves, scrubbing other people's filth from tile and porcelain. Then nights at Rosario's diner, where she took orders from construction workers and truckers and office workers commuting through the city at odd hours. 8 months of breathing in ammonia and fried grease. 8 months of her feet screaming by midnight. 8 months, and she had saved nothing because there was nothing left after rent and food and the other surgery that had cost her everything. The foreclosure notice on the kitchen table at home said the bank would take the house in 46 days. 46 days. 12 of those would be consumed by Oliver's surgery recovery. If he survived. When he survived. If. Her phone buzzed in her purse. A text from Marcus, her shift supervisor at Rosario's. "You're on tonight. 6 p.m. to 3 a.m. Don't be late." Valentina closed her eyes. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room hummed with an electric fury. The smell of antiseptic and human desperation saturated everything. Somewhere down the hallway, someone was crying. Somewhere else, machines beat their mechanical rhythms, counting down lives in measured intervals. She had no choice. She would work tonight. She would work every night until her body broke or Oliver's did, whichever came first. She would smile at strangers and carry hot plates and accept tips that barely covered the cost of the gas to drive to work. She would pretend that $43 could somehow become $22,000. She would pretend that 12 days was enough time for a miracle. Oliver set down his broken car and looked at her with eyes that were too old for his face. His grandmother had died 6 months ago. His father had died before he was even born. It was just the two of them. It had always been just the two of them. "Mommy, are you sad?" His small hand reached out and squeezed her trembling fingers. "No, baby. Mommy is not sad." Another lie, polished smooth from repetition. "Mommy is just tired." The hospital discharged them at 10:43 that morning. Oliver walked beside her slowly, his small hand in hers, his breathing loud enough to hear. The sidewalk was hot. The city pressed down from all directions, buildings and traffic and the weight of 8 million people carrying their own catastrophes. By 6 o'clock that evening, Valentina was tying her apron at Rosario's diner. The blue fabric was stained with 1,000 nights of spilled coffee and broken dreams. Her reflection in the mirror above the sink showed a woman who looked 40, not 29. Grey threaded through her dark hair. Lines around her eyes had become permanent fixtures, carved in by stress and sleeplessness. The dinner rush was chaos. Orders came in faster than she could call them out. Her feet sent pain signals up through her ankles. Her lower back screamed. But she moved, a ghost drifting between tables, a service machine designed to deliver food and collect money. A construction worker stiffed her on a $30 meal. Didn't even leave $1. She smiled and said thank you anyway because she needed this job. She needed the $5.50 minimum wage plus whatever tips landed in her pocket like scraps thrown to a dog. By 11 o'clock, the rush had thinned. A few late-night travelers. A couple of insomniacs. She was wiping down the counter when Marco walked in. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone like a tributary of pain. His suit was charcoal gray and probably cost more than Valentina made in 6 months. He did not sit at the counter. He walked straight to the corner booth. The booth that no one used anymore because everyone in Seattle knew that booth belonged to a man named Lorenzo Romano. Valentina watched him settle into the vinyl seat. She watched a second man join him, Dario, with shoulders like an NFL linebacker and hands that looked like they had broken things. Marco's voice was low. She could not hear the words. No one else in the diner could hear the words. But she felt them anyway. Felt the weight of whatever conversation was happening in that booth. Felt the electricity that charged the air when powerful men spoke in whispers about things that mattered. She did not know that she was watching the beginning of something. Did not know that in just over 3 hours, her hands would be on a man's chest, pushing him back toward life. Did not know that Preston Mercer was already planning how to destroy her, that Catherine Mercer was already sharpening her claws in anticipation, that everything Valentina was and everything she might become was about to change at the exact moment a man named Lorenzo Romano stopped breathing. She only knew that she had to work until 3 in the morning. That Oliver was home asleep with his neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who watched him for free because she pitied them. That there were now 11 days until the surgery. That her $43 had become $38 because Oliver needed new shoes and his old ones had finally split at the seams. She picked up her coffee pot and moved toward Marco and Dario's table, a ghost in a blue apron, invisible, waiting for the night that would make her visible. Rain began to fall outside Rosario's diner, tapping against the windows like urgent fingers seeking entry. The rain had stopped, but the streets of Seattle still glistened like wet glass under the sodium lights. August heat hung thick and wet in the air, the kind of heat that made breathing feel like swallowing steam. Valentina Harper walked down 3rd Avenue with her 5-year-old son Oliver's small hand clasped in hers, 2 plastic grocery bags cutting into her palms with each step. The bags held pasta, eggs, rice, the cheapest options from the bottom shelves of Safeway. In her pocket, folded 3 times, were $43. Everything left after rent. Oliver's sneakers slapped against the wet pavement in that rhythm only children can keep, uneven, wandering, completely unbothered by the weight of the world his mother carried. He was humming something, a song from school, and she listened to him hum because listening to him humming meant she did not have to think about the conversation with Dr. Rashid that afternoon. Did not have to think about the words valve replacement or congenital defect or the number $197,000. The neon signs reflected in the puddles around them, fractured and unreal, turning the sidewalk into a map of broken light. A pink sign flickering in a restaurant window. A blue sign advertising a phone store that had closed 6 months ago. Red and white stripes from a barber shop where people with money got haircuts. Valentina did not cut Oliver's hair anymore. She did it herself with kitchen scissors, trying not to cry when he held still and asked if he looked like Daddy. At the corner of Pike Street, everything changed. Sitting in a recessed doorway, soaking wet and shivering, was a little girl. She could not have been more than 7 years old. Her clothes clung to her skin like she had been left out in the rain on purpose. No jacket. No shoes. Just a thin dress that had been pink once, and hair that matted against her cheeks in strings. No adult anywhere. No mother. No father. No one at all. Just a child, alone, trembling, watching the world pass by without seeing her. Valentina's feet stopped moving before her mind told them to stop. She set the grocery bags down on the wet concrete. Oliver tugged her sleeve. "Mommy, why are we stopping?" His voice was small, curious, unburdened by the thing that had just seized her chest and squeezed until breathing became impossible. Valentina knelt down in front of the girl. The wet pavement immediately soaked through her jeans at the knees. She did not notice. "Are you okay, sweetheart? Where are your parents?" The girl's eyes were hollow. Eyes that had seen too much too soon. She whispered something so quietly that Valentina had to lean closer, her ear nearly touching the child's matted hair. "I'm hungry." The words landed like a gunshot in the silence of the empty street. Valentina straightened up slowly. She looked at the grocery bags. Pasta. Eggs. A carton of milk. 2 cans of beans. Bread. These things were supposed to last them 9 days. 9 days until her next paycheck, the one that would not actually cover anything but the things that absolutely had to be covered. She had already calculated it 3 times. Rent was due. Oliver's medication for his heart condition cost $30 a month. There was gas to consider, electricity, water. She reached into her pocket with a hand that had begun to shake. 3 20s. 3 1s. That was the shape of her survival. The shape of her child's survival. The shape of everything she had fought for and sacrificed for and carried alone through the heaviest nights. She pulled out a 20. Then a 10. Then another 10. "Here, baby," she whispered, pressing the bills into the little girl's cold hand. "Get yourself something warm to eat. Find a police officer, okay? Tell them you need help." Oliver tugged at her sleeve again, harder this time. His voice was different now, frightened in the way children sound when they sense something fundamental has broken. "Mommy, that was for my medicine." Valentina's hand shook as she stood. She picked up the grocery bags, lighter now in a way that had nothing to do with weight. "I know, baby. But she needs it more right now." The walk to the bus stop felt longer than it ever had. The sidewalk stretched in front of her like a blade. Oliver did not hum anymore. He walked beside her with his small hand in hers, and she could feel him trying to understand something his 5-year-old mind could not quite grasp, that sometimes there are not enough dollars in the world to save everyone. She had $3 left. 50 feet away, on the other side of the street, a black Mercedes sat idling with tinted windows that reflected nothing. Inside, Lorenzo Romano watched the entire exchange. His eyes, dark and precise like a general surveying a battlefield, never left Valentina's face. His hand rested on the armrest. His knuckles bore the white scars of a lifetime of violence. Beside him, Vinny sat with his own eyes narrowing, tracking the woman in the torn shoes with the grocery bags and the child. "Boss, you seeing this?" A woman in torn shoes just gave away grocery money to a street kid. "Who does that?" Lorenzo did not answer immediately. His jaw was working slightly, the muscle there moving like he was chewing on something bitter. When he finally spoke, his voice came out quiet and solid like an oath. Find out who she is. Everything about her. Now. I want her name, her address, her son's school, what she eats for breakfast. Everything. Vinny nodded once and reached for his phone. The Mercedes pulled away from the curb without sound, without haste, without any indication that something had just shifted in the world. Lorenzo Romano had built an empire by noticing things other men overlooked. By understanding the difference between the people who broke under pressure and the people who became harder. Between the people who thought only of themselves and the people who gave away their last $40 to a stranger's child in the rain. He had no name for what he felt. He had spent the last 23 years trying to stop feeling anything at all. 3 hours later, Valentina stood in the examination room at Seattle General Hospital. The fluorescent lights hummed above her head in that particular way that made her want to scream. Oliver sat on the examination table, his legs swinging, his small feet not quite reaching the floor. Dr. Rashid stood in front of her with a folder in his hands and an expression that had already delivered the news before he opened his mouth. I want you to listen carefully, Dr. Rashid said. His voice was kind. Kindness, Valentina had learned, made terrible news somehow worse. Your son's echocardiogram shows progression. The valve defect is moving faster than we anticipated at the last appointment. She felt the room tilt slightly. Felt herself stepping outside of her body and watching from a corner, watching a woman in a blue apron who smelled like coffee and desperation listening to a man in a white coat explain the end of everything she had been working toward. What does that mean? Her voice sounded like it came from underwater. It means he needs surgery. Heart valve replacement. We discussed this possibility 6 months ago, but I was hoping the medication would slow the progression. It hasn't. The valve is calcifying too quickly. If we don't do the surgery by August 19th, the damage becomes irreversible. The risk of sudden cardiac failure increases dramatically. Irreversible. The word hung in the air like smoke. How much? She whispered it. The surgery itself, the anesthesiologist, the hospital stay, the follow-up care for 6 weeks post-op, approximately $200,000. She felt her knees try to buckle. She locked them straight. Insurance covers $178,000. You would need to cover the remainder out of pocket. $22,000. August 19th is 12 days away, she heard someone say. Maybe it was her voice. Maybe it was a voice coming through a radio from somewhere very far away. That's not possible. Dr. Rashid's expression did not change. He had delivered impossible news before. I understand this is overwhelming. There are payment plans. Hospital finance can work with you on installments. Talk to them before you leave today. Oliver had stopped swinging his legs. He was watching his mother's face with the gravity of someone far older than 5 years old. Children know. That was the terrible truth no one told you. Children know when the ground has opened up beneath their mothers. Valentina drove to Rosario's diner at 4:36 in the afternoon because she had to work the evening shift and because the diner was the only place in the world where she felt like she was doing something useful. The kitchen smelled like grease and garlic and the particular smell of a place where people fed their sadness into their bodies. She clocked in. She pulled on her apron. She tied her hair back. $3 in her pocket. 12 days until August 19th. $200,000. She picked up a coffee pot and began to move through the diner, pouring dark liquid into white cups, collecting dollar bills that would not add up to anything, smiling at people who did not really see her, because that was what she did now. She moved like a ghost. She became invisible. She survived. The August humidity pressed against Valentina Harper's skin like a wet hand as she cut through the alley behind 4th Avenue at 1:36 in the morning. The warehouse shift had ended 2 hours ago. Her feet ached in shoes held together by prayer and duct tape. Above, distant thunder rolled across the Seattle sky, the kind of sound that made you feel small. She touched the photograph in her pocket, Marcus, her late husband, smiling from a moment before the cancer took him 3 years ago. She did this when she was afraid. Touched his face like it was a prayer, like the dead could still protect the living. The footsteps started when she was halfway through the alley. She heard them before she turned. The scrape of expensive shoes on pavement. Too many of them. Moving with deliberate slowness, the kind of speed that said we are not in a hurry because we own this moment. Valentina turned. 3 men stepped from the shadows. The one in front was beautiful in that dangerous way certain men are beautiful. Preston Mercer was 28, with dark hair and a jawline sharp enough to cut glass. His suit cost more than her monthly rent. On his wrist, a gold watch caught the streetlight, a Rolex, something she knew only because she had cleaned houses where men wore them while ignoring her completely. Behind him stood 2 larger men in tailored black, their shoulders wide enough to block out the world. Valentina Harper, Preston said. His voice was smooth like oil. You have been asking questions about Lorenzo Romano. She backed toward the brick wall. Her shoulders found it. Cold. Rough. Solid. I don't know what you are talking about, she said. Preston stepped closer. You were seen watching his car tonight. Asking his driver about employment. Visiting his office building on 5th. My uncle does not need gold diggers sniffing around. He smiled. So here is what is going to happen. You are going to forget you ever heard his name. You are going to stop following him. You are going to disappear from his life completely. I haven't done anything wrong. I was just what? Looking for a rich man to exploit. Preston's eyes went cold. I know about Oliver. Your son. 5 years old. Seattle General Hospital. Scheduled surgery in 12 days. Valentina's blood froze. The doctors told you the bill, didn't they? Preston continued. $200,000. Your insurance covers most of it. But you still owe $22,000 that you will never have. I run collections for certain medical providers. Very certain providers. One word from me and Seattle General drops your case entirely. Surgery cancelled. Oliver's little heart condition gets worse and worse until he is just another dead kid from a poor family. Do you understand what I am saying to you? She nodded. She could not speak. Good. Then we have an understanding. Preston turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Valentina? If you tell my uncle about this conversation, if you mention my name to anyone, I will make sure Oliver never sees his 7th birthday. Am I clear? They left the way they came. Shadows swallowing shadows. Valentina slid down the brick wall. Her legs would not hold her. She sat on the filthy pavement and felt the night spin around her head. Preston Mercer knew about Oliver. He knew the exact amount, the exact timeline, the exact thing that would break her. Rain started falling then. Not a storm. Just rain. Steady. Cold. Indifferent. She sat there for 15 minutes, maybe longer. Time moved differently now. Everything had compressed into a single desperate equation, 12 days, $22,000, one child who could not afford to die. At 2:53 in the morning, Valentina got to her feet and started walking toward Rosario's diner. She was bleeding from where she had fallen on broken pavement during her panic, but she barely felt it. Her mind had collapsed into a single point of focus. She had seen Lorenzo Romano at the diner 6 weeks ago. Just once. He had been sitting in a corner booth, drinking coffee, looking like a man who owned the city and found it disappointing. She had taken his order. He had not looked at her. But he was there. He was real. And somehow, in the fractured logic of desperation, she believed that if she could reach him directly, explain that she meant no harm, maybe she could make Preston understand she was no threat. She had no plan. Just a drowning person reaching for anything floating. What she did not know was that Lorenzo Romano was at that exact diner because Preston had poisoned his drink at a family dinner 2 hours earlier. A substance meant to appear like a heart attack. Meant to look natural. Meant to make his uncle disappear while Preston inherited control of the entire Seattle underworld. Lorenzo's heart was failing as Valentina walked toward the diner. When she pushed through the doors at 3:22 in the morning, she found him slumped in the corner booth, his face the color of wet concrete, his breathing shallow and broken. The room went silent. Valentina did not hesitate. She did not think. She moved to him like her body knew what her mind could not process. She checked his pulse, barely there, thready, frantic. She tilted his head back, pinched his nose, covered his mouth with hers and breathed air into his lungs. 1, 2, 3. Call 911, she said without looking up. She placed the heel of her hand on his chest and began pressing. Counting. Breathing. Pressing. Her small hands on his expensive suit, on the heart that was supposed to stay beating because something had gone terribly wrong, because his nephew had miscalculated, because love sometimes arrives on its own timeline wearing the face of a desperate stranger. His men stood frozen. Dario. Vinny. Others whose names she would never know. Watching their boss being saved by a woman they had never seen before, a woman in a blood-stained jacket with desperate eyes and calloused hands. When the ambulance arrived, Lorenzo's heart was beating again. Weak. Irregular. But beating. Valentina collapsed against the wall and waited for the doctors to understand what had happened. She did not know that Lorenzo would spend the next 6 hours conscious, recovering, asking a single question over and over, who is she? The woman. Who is she and why would she save me? She did not know that in the penthouse office of Catherine Mercer on the 42nd floor of the Morgan building, Preston was receiving a phone call from the hospital telling him that his uncle had survived, that his plan had failed, that somehow a stranger's mouth had breathed life back into the man Preston had tried to kill. She did not know that Catherine Mercer, sitting in a chair that cost more than Valentina's entire apartment, was smiling. How fascinating, Catherine said, her voice like honey poured over broken glass. A gold digger who tried to play hero and accidentally became one. This is much better than death, Preston. This is opportunity. The rain continued falling on Seattle. The night stretched forward into its final hours. And in a hospital bed on the 5th floor of Harborview Medical Center, a man who had built his entire existence on vengeance and isolation opened his eyes to find that someone had chosen to save him. The question that would reshape everything was simple. Why? The hospital corridor hummed with the low frequency of fluorescent lights and rolling machines. Sandra Mills stood in Valentina's tiny apartment at 9 in the morning on August 16, clipboard pressed against her chest like a shield, her face arranged in the careful sympathy of someone delivering a sentence. The social worker's grey eyes moved across the cramped living room, freshly cleaned, almost desperate in its tidiness, then down to her papers. Miss Harper, there are concerning allegations about your association with organized crime figures and unexplained financial transactions, Sandra said, each word measured and official. Until we complete our investigation, Oliver cannot undergo surgery. We cannot approve a procedure when the home environment is under review. Valentina's hands began to shake. The small fingers gripping the edge of the kitchen counter went white. 2 days. 48 hours remained before Oliver's heart surgery, the surgery that had consumed her every waking moment for months, the surgery that cost $47,000 and stood between her son and death itself. I do not understand, Valentina whispered, though she understood perfectly. Preston. His father's nephew had struck like a viper with venom disguised as concern. Anonymous photographs of her entering Lorenzo's building at midnight, their context stripped away, leaving only the appearance of guilt. Doctored bank records that transformed the $22,000 Lorenzo had given her for Oliver's medical fund into something that looked like payment for unspeakable things. I am sorry, Sandra said, and she might have meant it. My hands are tied. The apartment door closed. The social worker's footsteps retreated down the stairwell. and Valentina stood alone in the silence, surrounded by the evidence of her desperation, Oliver's medications organized with military precision on the shelf, his clean bedroom visible through the open door, his drawing taped to the refrigerator that showed two figures holding hands, one tall and one small, both smiling beneath a yellow sun. 3 hours later, Valentina stood on the Aurora Bridge in humid August rain that finally broke the heat wave. The metal railing was cold beneath her palms, slick and indifferent. Grey water churned far below, and thunder rolled across the sky like the earth clearing its throat. Her hands gripped the metal so hard her knuckles turned the color of bone. Oliver will die because of me. Because I saved a stranger. Because I tried to help when I should have walked away. I have destroyed my own son. The thought spiraled down into darkness, pulling her with it. Maybe Marcus's parents could raise him better. Maybe he would have a chance without her, a mother who had nothing, a mother who made the wrong choices, a mother who was poison to everyone she touched. Maybe she should just let go. Maybe the water below would be a mercy. Her phone buzzed. The text came from her neighbor watching Oliver at the hospital. "Mommy, when are you coming back? I drew you a picture of us after my heart is fixed. We are holding hands." Valentina slid down against the railing and sobbed, her body heaving with sounds that were not quite human. Not tears of sadness anymore, but tears of rage, of refusal, of a mother returning to herself like a knife finding its sheath. She stood. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. And she dialed Lorenzo. The penthouse office occupied the entire 41st floor, floor-to-ceiling windows framing Seattle's skyline like a painting someone else owned. Lorenzo sat behind a desk of dark wood that cost more than Valentina's entire life, and she stood before him like a supplicant, her voice breaking as she explained the CPS investigation, the false allegations, the surgery delayed. Lorenzo's rage was a cold thing, the kind that required no volume to be dangerous. His jaw tightened. His fingers spread flat against the desk as if he could push down something rising inside him. "Preston weaponized the system," he said, his voice like gravel beneath snow. "He used my own money to paint you as corrupt. Can you stop it?" Valentina asked. "Can you fix this?" Lorenzo reached for the phone on his desk. His fingers moved with the economy of someone accustomed to obedience. "Marcus, I need everything on Preston Mercer. Financial records. Communications. Associates. Everything from the last 5 years. I want it by tonight." He hung up. His dark eyes that had watched a father die, eyes that carried the weight of 20 years of vengeance, found her face. "Preston made a mistake," Lorenzo said. "He filed an official investigation. That creates a paper trail. And paper trails can be followed in both directions." "I do not understand," Valentina said. "Preston claimed you are connected to organized crime. To investigate that claim, authorities have to investigate the organized crime connections. Which means investigating everyone in my family. Including Preston. And Preston is not as careful as he thinks." At 11 o'clock that night, 12 men in black FBI raid jackets moved through Preston Mercer's luxury condo like ghosts, their footsteps silent on marble floors. Special Agent Rebecca Torres held a warrant that fluttered slightly as she read it aloud. "Preston Mercer, you are under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, wire fraud, and filing false police reports." Preston's face drained of all color. He was still in his silk pajamas, expensive and cream-colored, the kind of fabric that felt like breathing against skin. His expensive world collapsed in seconds. "This is insane," he said, his voice cracking. "I am a legitimate businessman. My uncle is." "Your uncle provided the evidence," Agent Torres interrupted. "When we looked into the CPS report you filed, we found your financial records attached to the investigation file. Very interesting reading. Offshore accounts. Skimmed funds from your uncle's operations over 7 years. Bribes to city officials. All documented." Preston's knees buckled. He collapsed trembling like a cornered animal, his expensive pajamas suddenly looking like a costume, like something he had never truly earned the right to wear. He set me up, Preston screamed as agents gripped his arms. That bastard set me up. No, sir, Torres said, her voice almost gentle. You set yourself up the moment you filed fraudulent charges. We just followed your own trail. 40 years minimum. Federal charges that would follow him into a federal prison cell, where the expensive clothes would be stripped away and replaced with something grey and meaningless. 3 blocks away, at the Four Seasons Hotel, Catherine Mercer stood at a podium accepting an award for philanthropy. 200 guests in formal wear sat in an audience that believed her, trusted her, celebrated her. The ballroom glittered with the kind of light that makes corruption invisible. Then the doors opened. Lorenzo Romano entered in a black suit that cost more than Valentina's salary for 6 months. Vinny and Dario flanked him like shadows. The room went absolutely silent. Conversation stopped mid-breath. The applause died like a candle snuffed out. Catherine's smile froze on her face. Lorenzo walked to the podium and took the microphone. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption. But I thought you should know the woman you are honoring tonight has spent the last decade embezzling from the very charities she claims to support. He nodded to the back of the ballroom. Agents in federal windbreakers entered. Catherine's carefully constructed world began to crack. She orchestrated a media campaign to destroy an innocent single mother's reputation because that mother saved my life, Lorenzo continued, each word like a blade wrapped in ice. She weaponized her position on hospital boards to delay a child's life-saving surgery. And she raised a son who believed he could buy and steal his way to power. You have no proof, Catherine hissed, but her voice trembled. 12 years of financial records, Lorenzo said. Every bribe. Every stolen dollar. Every life you destroyed. Your own accountant turned state evidence when the FBI offered immunity. Agent Torres approached. The handcuffs clicked shut against Catherine's wrists in front of 200 witnesses. Cameras flashed. The charity gala became a crime scene. Catherine screamed as they led her away, I am a Mercer. You cannot do this. Lorenzo leaned close enough that only she could hear him. You forgot the cardinal rule, Catherine. Never threaten children. 40 years. Federal prison. Every asset frozen. The charity she had stolen from would receive restitution. The empire of cruelty she had built over decades crumbled in minutes. August 18th arrived carrying the kind of August heat that makes breathing difficult, but inside Seattle General Hospital, the temperature was controlled to the 10th of a degree. Valentina held Oliver's small hand as orderlies rolled his gurney toward the surgical suite. His 5-year-old face was brave, but his eyes betrayed him. Mommy, I am scared, Oliver said. Valentina kissed his forehead. I know, baby. But you are the bravest person I know. I will be right here when you wake up. Is Mr. Lorenzo coming? She looked up to find Lorenzo standing in the hallway, still wearing yesterday's suit, looking like a man who had not slept, who had spent the entire night ensuring that the system that had tried to break her was broken instead. He nodded to Oliver, a gesture of absolute presence. The surgery took 6 hours and 17 minutes. Valentina paced the waiting room like a caged animal. She prayed to a god she had almost stopped believing in. She broke down twice, once alone in the bathroom where the fluorescent lights made everything look like it was already dying, and once in Lorenzo's arms, where he held her in silence while orderlies and nurses moved around them with the practiced invisibility of people who had seen 1,000 versions of this exact moment. Dr. Rashid emerged at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, still in surgical scrubs, a smile cutting across her face. The surgery was successful, Dr. Rashid said. Oliver is stable. He did beautifully. Valentina collapsed, her entire body giving way to relief so profound it felt like rebirth. Her son would live. The small heart that had struggled since birth had been repaired by human hands and human skill and human hope. Oliver would grow. He would run. He would become a man. Lorenzo sat beside her in the recovery room as Oliver slept, small and slight beneath the white hospital blanket, his chest wrapped in bandages that covered the place where a surgeon had opened him up and saved his life. "When my father died," Lorenzo said quietly, "I was helpless. I watched from across a room and did nothing. I spent 20 years making sure I was never helpless again. But you taught me something different, Valentina. Sometimes the bravest thing is not power. It is trust. Choosing to save someone when you have every reason to run. You did that for me. Let me be here for you now." Valentina did not answer. She simply leaned against his shoulder and finally let herself believe that this moment was real, that her son would wake up healed, that the darkness that had pursued her for so long had finally released its grip. Outside the hospital, the August rain began again, and Seattle washed itself clean. 3 weeks had passed since the surgery, and Oliver's scar was healing into a thin pink line across his small chest. Valentina watched him from her apartment window as he ran circles around the tiny balcony, his movements free and wild in a way they had never been before. His breathing came easy now. No gasping. No blue lips. Just a 6-year-old boy learning what it felt like to be whole. She wore a navy blazer with a white blouse, the uniform of her new job at a consulting firm downtown. Lorenzo had arranged it quietly, not as charity, but as legitimate work. A real position with health insurance, a 401k, paid time off. The kind of stability that had seemed impossible 12 weeks ago when she had $43 to her name and a hospital bill for $47,000 hanging over her like a guillotine. The apartment was small still, but cleaner now. There were no eviction notices on the kitchen counter. The refrigerator held food that was not salvaged from restaurant dumpsters. Oliver had new shoes that actually fit. Lorenzo arrived at 6 in the evening with takeout containers and wine. He moved through her space now with a kind of careful reverence, as though entering a sacred place. He set the food on her second-hand table and kissed Oliver's forehead while the boy showed him a drawing he had made at school. "That is a fire truck," Lorenzo said, studying the red crayon marks with complete seriousness. "A magnificent fire truck." "It is a dinosaur," Oliver corrected, giggling. "Even better," Lorenzo said. Valentina watched them and felt something shift in her chest. Not pain. Something close to healing. Oliver's friend Marcus picked him up at 7, his mother arriving with genuine warmth instead of the cold pity Valentina had grown used to. The neighborhood was changing too. People who had once crossed the street when they saw her now waved. Word had spread quietly that Preston Mercer was awaiting trial on 17 counts including attempted murder and conspiracy. That Catherine Mercer, the philanthropist and society fixture, had been arrested in a federal raid that found financial records documenting decades of blackmail, extortion, and human trafficking. That the woman who had spent months destroying Valentina's reputation had been destroyed in return, publicly, completely, with no mercy. Once Oliver left, Valentina and Lorenzo stepped onto her balcony. The evening was cool, Seattle's September sky turning pink and gold above the city's spires. Lights began to bloom in the distance like scattered stars. Lorenzo was different in moments like this. Softer somehow, though no less present. He had built his empire on the principle that vulnerability was death. That showing weakness was an invitation to be destroyed. But something had broken open in him the night she chose his life over her own, and he had not been able to seal it shut again. "I need to tell you something," he said, and his voice carried a weight that made her turn toward him completely. "The night you saved me, Preston poisoned my drink. If you had not performed CPR, I would have died before the ambulance arrived." Valentina's breath caught. "I did not know that." "I know. That is what I am trying to say." He turned to face her, and the city lights caught in his dark eyes. "You did not calculate whether I was worth saving. You did not think about who I was or what I could do for you. You simply saw someone dying and you chose to save him. In my world, Valentina, that is rarer than gold." She reached for his hand. "Is that so unusual? In my world, everyone wants something. Every single person. They want power or money or protection or the opportunity to climb higher. For 20 years, no one has been in my presence without wanting something from me. He paused, his jaw tightening. Then you stumbled into my life with blood running down your face and a desperate prayer on your lips. And you chose to save me instead of yourself. You cracked something open inside me I thought was sealed forever. Valentina stepped closer. The balcony was so small they were nearly touching. What are you saying? I am saying that I spent 2 decades becoming the kind of man who cannot be hurt because he cannot be touched. My father died when I was a boy. I watched from across a room and did nothing. I swore I would never be helpless again. His voice was like thunder now, deep and solid. But you taught me something. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is trust. Sometimes the bravest thing is letting someone see you. She reached up and touched his face. Then be seen. All of you. Not just the parts that are powerful. Lorenzo went very still. Then he stepped back and did something that made her breath stop completely. He knelt. Not as a gesture of submission, but as an act of deliberate vulnerability. From his jacket, he pulled a photograph she had not seen in months. It was her, younger, standing beside a man with kind eyes. Marcus. Her husband. The man who had taught her that love was something you could give even when it cost you everything. Your husband, Lorenzo said quietly. You still carry his photograph in your heart, and I am not asking you to forget him or replace him. I could never be what he was to you. But I am asking you to let me earn a place beside that love. Not above it. Not instead of it. Beside it. Let me be the man who sits with you on this balcony. Let me be the man Oliver calls for when he has a nightmare. Let me be someone you can trust. Valentina pulled him to his feet, and tears were streaming down her face. You already are. 1 month later, Oliver's birthday party unfolded in a public park under a Seattle sky that had decided to be kind. A small gathering. Some of Oliver's classmates ran through the grass. Valentina's co-workers from her new job brought a cake. Vinny and Dario stood at a distance, watching, smiling in the way that only men who had worked for Lorenzo could smile, content to witness something they never expected to see. Lorenzo stood beside the baseball diamond, teaching Oliver how to grip the ball properly. His expensive suit was abandoned at home. He wore jeans and a gray shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and he looked like a different man entirely. Or perhaps the same man, just finally allowed to be whole. You throw from here, Lorenzo was saying, guiding Oliver's small arm back. Then snap your wrist like this. Let the ball do the work. Oliver threw. The baseball sailed wildly over the grass and lodged itself in a hedge 20 feet away. Oliver's face crumpled. Lorenzo knelt beside him. Do you know what that throw told me? That you are brave. That you tried with your whole heart. That is all that matters. Come on. We get the ball and try again. Valentina watched them jog toward the hedge together, and she understood something profound. She had given her last dollar to a child in the rain when she was desperate and hunted. She had saved a man's life when she had nothing to gain. And that single moment of selflessness had cracked open the most feared person in Seattle, reminding him that strength was not the absence of vulnerability. It was the courage to be vulnerable anyway. Catherine Mercer was serving a 40-year federal sentence in a women's prison in Oregon, her entire fortune seized and liquidated, her reputation dust. Preston was awaiting trial, his lawyers abandoning him one by one as the evidence mounted. The men who had tried to destroy Valentina were destroyed instead, not through violence, but through justice. Through the systematic exposure of every crime, every cruelty, every moment of darkness they had hidden beneath expensive suits and social standing. By Christmas, Valentina and Lorenzo sat in Rosario's diner at 11 p.m., returning to the booth where everything had changed 9 months ago. Oliver sat between them, coloring a picture on the laminated menu. Tony, the owner, brought hot chocolate for the boy and coffee for the adults, on the house like always. Outside, Seattle's rare snow fell in soft flakes that disappeared the moment they touched the warm pavement. The diner was nearly empty. The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar song. And in that moment, Valentina reached across the table and took Lorenzo's hand. "I remember," he said quietly, "when you asked me why I helped you. Why someone like me would give everything to save someone like you. That night in the hospital," Valentina said. "You told me you had spent 20 years becoming someone who could never be vulnerable. And then I came into your life and changed everything." "You did not change me," Lorenzo said. "You reminded me of who I could be. My father died because I was helpless. And I spent decades making sure I would never be helpless again. But then you showed me something different. You showed me that real strength is not about power or fear or control. Real strength is choosing to trust. Choosing to open your heart even when it terrifies you." Oliver looked up from his drawing. "Mommy, look. I drew us. All three of us." The picture showed 3 stick figures holding hands. Lorenzo stared at it like it was the most valuable thing he had ever seen. Valentina pulled her son close and understood the truth that had taken 9 months to fully comprehend. Every day we choose between fear and trust. Between closing ourselves off and opening our hearts. She had given her last dollar to help a stranger and had gained a family. She had risked everything and had found everything. And the most feared man in Seattle had learned that vulnerability was not weakness. It was the only real strength that existed. The snow continued to fall outside Rosario's diner, and 3 people sat together in a corner booth, finally home. How did this story make you feel? Please leave a comment below and share what is in your heart. If you enjoyed this, hit that like button and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming tomorrow. Share this with someone who needs to hear it.